Hi, Kelly Campbell. How are you?
Hello, I am so excited to be here with you, and I'm so excited that you're doing this podcast.
Thank you, and thank you. Yeah, I first got to know Kelly probably over 10 years ago. She wouldn't remember, I don't think, because I was in the audience. She was on a panel for the advertising industry back in my former career. And she was one of those people that was just so powerful and eloquent. And I said to myself, man, that's someone I'd really love to know. Reached out to her on LinkedIn and we LinkedIn connected. And then it wasn't really until this past year that life put us really on each other's paths. I was fortunate to be a part of a leadership circle that Kelly led, and it was phenomenal. We'll talk more about that. And she's been just a great support and advisor. I've had a very evolutionary year and such an important part of that for me. So thank you. And I couldn't be more thrilled that you're now a part of this podcast.
Well, I was absolutely honored to support you. I can't believe that was a decade ago.
Roughly, it was a while, but I was sending kinds of good vibes your way, even if you didn't know it.
So, I appreciate that.
Oh, sure, anytime. So let's let people get to know you a little bit. What do you want to share about your career, what you're doing professionally?
God, I feel like this is going to be such a mouthful.
Do it. That's why we're here.
So, I'm a former CEO. I used to define myself by being a CEO of a cause marketing agency. We serve nonprofits and foundations and social impact initiatives before any of that was kind of cool. It felt like my life's work. And little did I know that that was not even close to my life's work. I think I'm still figuring out what my life's work is. But since then, I've kind of gone from that CEO over-identification as a CEO to a consultant, specifically for other agency founders and owners. And then that led me to actually becoming a coach, and in particular, a trauma-informed leadership coach. I started figuring out this correlation between why some of us step into these leadership roles, whether they're self-made or appointed, and how that is correlated to the childhood trauma that we have not actually resolved. And so how we show up as leaders is really based on our formative years and, based on a lot of the traumatic experiences that we have not integrated. And just for context, I like to say that trauma is really just the nervous system's inability to cope with a stressor. Mm-hmm. So we don't even have to go into big T trauma, small T trauma and be comparative about it. It's just, hey, there were experiences that we've all had that we were unable to cope with at the time. And that trauma gets stored in our bodies and it comes out in lots of different ways. Our behaviors, the way that we think, the way that we treat other people, mm-hmm. self-limiting beliefs, right? Patterns that we just continue to get locked into in some ways. That was really fascinating to me. And if I think back to college, I was minoring in psychology and I didn't really understand why, but it was very fascinating to me. And so I don't know, I feel like some of this is coming full circle. So I still have a little bit of a foot in the business world, the organizational leadership world. I used to write for Forbes. I now write for Entrepreneur, done some writing for Fast Company in this last year. I wrote a new book, which came out at the end of April of this year, mm-hmm. Heal to Lead. Separately, it sounds like I do a lot, but I'm telling you, I really don't feel like I do a lot. Separately, I own a speakers agency because after the murder of George Floyd, it was really important to me to make sure that BIPOC, LGBTQ, disabled, military veterans, everyone who was underrepresented in the space of sharing their stories, sharing their lived experiences and their expertise, that they had an equal platform. And it's very difficult for all of us in that space to be represented. And so I wanted to change that. And so I created Consciousness Leaders as a way to change that. So all of these emerging speakers and established speakers who just because of, who they are and who they love, were not getting represented. So that's a separate component of what I do in the world. And then I also do some energy and natural healing. I don't have a website about that. It's kind of a new thing for me. But it really feels like the place where I don't know, there's a lot of converging of a lot of things that I am personally and professionally drawn to. Don't feel like it takes much effort to do. Feels very natural to me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's interesting how the career journey has just really pivoted and changed along the way.
Yeah. What I hear in that is just you leading with your heart in terms of the things that you commit yourself to and where you choose to put your energy and your time. And I mean, there's no way you aren't doing a million things because I'm sure there are things you left out. I think maybe it feels like you're not because it's just so natural and so close to who you are that it doesn't feel like work in some ways.
Yeah, in some ways it does. It just feels like breathing. It feels very natural and very, very effortless. It doesn't mean that I don't, put in some time, but I'm also have great boundaries around that time. So I feel really good about the place where I'm at right now and this kind of influx or this shift of coaching. I think I'll be coaching for a long time and stepping more into that kind of like the healing arts feels very new for me and feels very exciting. So I'm just leaning into that.
Awesome. Well, speaking of being in a good place, I think you have some good things going on in your personal world as well.
Yes, I did just get engaged 2 weeks ago, which is really exciting. We got engaged out in Washington State on a very wild, natural beach, Ruby Beach, which is in the Olympic National Park. And yeah, it feels like after 2.5 years, I mean, I knew from the first date that this was the person that I wanted to spend my life with. And when I have heard other people say things like that, I'm like, how is that possible? Mm-hmm. But now I can speak from experience and say, yeah, that it was very clear to me then. And there was also no rush to move into it quickly because I was that sure and that secure. And, yeah, I'm pretty excited about where our relationship will go, how we will each evolve individually and, in relationship. And also I think that there's an opportunity for us to work together, professionally. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of exciting. Next year, I'm doing a few retreats I think it's in Colorado. Cool. Where I can say it now, my fiance also is a yoga instructor in addition to doing so many other things. She's a fierce entrepreneur. And as a yoga instructor, she's going to be able to lead some of the yoga classes during the retreat. So co-facilitating retreats with her feels pretty amazing.
That's great. Yeah, today's the first time I'm seeing you face to face since the news of the engagement.
Do I look different?
Yeah, completely. I hardly recognize it. So happy for you guys. And yeah, it was so weird. I sent you these photos of rainbows randomly, I guess, right at the moment that you were proposing, which I had no idea was going on. So that was a kind of an interesting little, I don't know what that was, but it was very cool.
It's synchronistic and it doesn't surprise me, Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. So as we're going to start to move into the story that you're going to share, what do you want the audience to know about the intersectionality of who you are?
Well, I am a white, able-bodied person who is proudly gender fluid. It's taken me a long time to get there. Mm-hmm. Understand why I felt so much discomfort in my body, but proudly gender fluid, queer. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns interchangeably. I like them interchangeably. And I like them so interchangeably, yes, but when I say my pronouns, I say they, she, and it's in that order instead of she, they, because they feels more like me. If I had to say which one feels more like me, I mean, they both feel like me, but let's say there are on average 30 days out of a month. Let's say 18 of those days, I feel more they, and the other 12 feel more like she, right? Just to try to give some data to it. But yeah, so that also has been a journey. I didn't change my pronouns until I was in my 40s. And maybe before I always knew I was queer, but I didn't have language. And so language is so important. Right. And so in thinking about, well, I don't necessarily feel on the spectrum of gender. I don't necessarily feel one or the other. Right. So I could say, yes, I'm non-binary or gender non-conforming, but gender fluid, I'm a Scorpio too. So water sign. So the fluidity of it, because that's what it feels like to me.
Mhm.
It feels like there's a movement to the way that I express my gender and how I feel internally on any given day, right? That could change and flow from the morning to the night inside of the same 24 hours. It doesn't mean that I don't know who I am. In fact, it actually is quite the opposite.
Mhm.
I feel even more clear about who I am, and the nuance of moving from feeling a little bit more they to a little bit more she, right? That's something that only comes with really deeply knowing yourself and taking the time to get rooted. And so the discomfort that I used to feel in my body doesn't feel the same way. And I think part of it is language, part of it is trusting myself. I think part of it's just getting older and wiser too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it. Words matter so much. And it sounds like that language opens you up to flow within who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think there's some interesting thing about what I'm doing, meaning how I show up from a gender standpoint, right? Like if I'm leading a group, which you are part of,
Mm-hmm.
I might be a little bit more in my sort of they energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that I can be, I'm being intentional about how I say this because I haven't talked about this before,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's very fascinating to me. In that kind of space, it's like I have to hold space, which is a more feminine, right? Kind of
Mm-hmm.
energy, but then I'm also leading. And so, yeah, there's this really nice kind of fluidity to how I might show up from a gendered standpoint. And that feels great to me.
Yeah.
And again, if I didn't have language for it before, it was like, why don't I feel comfortable? Why does this feel hard?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It doesn't feel so hard anymore.
That's beautiful. And I mean, if you just use the couple terms that are typically given to us, it's limiting.
Yeah. I feel out form sometimes and it's like gender, male, female, non-binary. And I'm like, all right, it's better. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, there's so many more expressions of gender. And, a lot of the right wing rhetoric about, people who are trans or non-binary, not only not knowing who they are, but it being like a sickness, right? A psychological illness. It's really interesting to me how someone can feel like they have the wherewithal and the permission and the authority to tell you how you feel
Right.
in your own body,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's nothing sick about that. It's the most natural thing in the world, right? If you look at the indigenous cultures, Native American cultures, they've revered two-spirit people for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they actually believe that people who are two-spirited are the balanced ones.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it feels very natural. And I feel like there is just something unique about holding space as a person who feels very fluid in that way. So we could go on a whole tangent about this. This could be like a whole different podcast. And I wasn't even planning on talking about that, but it just kind of came out. So.
No, thank you. And I said up front how eloquent you are, and that's not easy to try to put into words what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you for taking the time to do that.
Yeah, thank you. It just feels like it wants to come out, it's there on my heart. So.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I know that you have a story you'd like to share about a moment or moments in your career where you were navigating in from an outsider's perspective as an underrepresented person. And which one rose to the top for you?
So I thought about this, and there are many moments. I was, as I said before, CEO of a cause marketing agency. So we had lots of clients. I was a singular owner of that agency. So I didn't have a business partner. So I was the face, right? And before we had salespeople, because we didn't get those until 4, 5, 6 years into the agency. Before we had salespeople, it was just me. And so as a very young, newly out, I think I came out when I was 19. Okay. So a newly out person going out and getting business, especially from people who were in more conservative positions or from more conservative generations, or in more conservative fields, because so the majority of our work was in nonprofit and social impact, but some of it was just local businesses because I was building up an agency, right? The story that I want to share is ironically with someone who was the owner of a financial services company. And she was gay. She was older. And when I went for the first business development meeting, right, she wanted a whole branding, packaging, not packaging, not CPG packaging, but a brand package, right? Brand identity work. And it was pretty comprehensive because, in financial services, they have a million, folders and letters and all these different things, business cards, etc. I knew that we could do the job really, really well. And I think going to that office that day, I did something that was against who I am now. I thought I had to conform to who she was and have the ways in which she was conservative and the ways in which she showed up. So I took out my eyebrow piercing. I hid my tattoos. At the time, I had multiple silver earrings, because you do when you're 19 and you're first coming out. You cut your hair and you have lots of silver jewelry. I took all of that out and I had a singular set of earrings. And I mean, you can't do anything about the short haircut, but so I went in with a suit on and stripped of my self-expression. And that was my mistake. So she could smell that from a million miles away because she was one of these, fairly low conscious leaders with what I would call now that chose to make sure that I knew who was in charge. This story basically goes that I presented our portfolio because she wanted to make sure that we were the right agency, and answered all of her questions very professionally. And every time I went to turn the page of the portfolio, I have, I don't know if you can see this in the video, but my wrist tattoo, right? And at the time it wasn't a sleeve, it was just a wrist tattoo. But every time I turned the page of the portfolio, my jacket sleeve pulled up about an inch and she could see it. And so every time I noticed her gaze go down to that, I pulled the jacket sleeve up a bit, down so that she couldn't see it. At the end of the meeting, and it was clear that she was establishing dominance and just again, very authoritarian in the way that she showed up. She made some comment to her administrative assistant. "Oh, don't you think that's a very interesting haircut that Kelly has? What do you think that means?" And I was like, what is happening here? Like, is this what I think is happening? And I think I probably, in all honesty, Shanti, I think I dissociated a little bit because I was like, wait, am I safe? Am I safe here? I thought I was safe because I had known or heard through the grapevine that this particular person was also gay. So I was like, oh, I'm going to be in a safe space. Yeah, it turns out not so much. When we were finished with the meeting, I left and we were walking out. She put her hand on my shoulder, which you just don't do that. Like, I didn't consent to that. Put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Listen, I'm going to just give you a piece of advice. I see that you have tattoos. I am fine with them, but other people may not be. So my advice to you is to wear a watch next time, cover that up." And I said, "Thank you." And I walked out, and it didn't matter to me whether we got the job or not, right? But I walked out, and I think when I walked out, when I actually walked through the glass doors of her office and was waiting for the elevator, I think that's when some of the emotions started to come up, because I was so frozen and so dissociated in the moment. I didn't have a voice. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't. Right. And so I got in my car and I looked in the mirror, the rear view mirror, and I remember saying to myself, never again.
Wow.
Never again. So every single meeting from that day forward, I kept all my jewelry in. I wore short sleeves, the whole nine. I was going to be me. If I was going to own this company and we were going to work with people, I was going to be me. And if they didn't like that and didn't want to work with me because of who I was, what I looked like, what my self-expression was, I did not want their money. Not all money is good money. So again, the ironic part of this entire story is, what I'm going to say, and you don't even know the story, is that not only did that person become a client because we were really good at what we did, that company was also one of the clients that was with us for the entire 14 years that I had the company.
What?
And was one of the clients that was then part of the acquisition when we got acquired in 2016.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So, I say not all money is good money. And I was young and I didn't know how to navigate all of that. If the same thing had happened today, I would have actually said what I needed to say, enacted really clean, healthy boundaries, and walked out of the office.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably 23, maybe 24. I didn't have the tools. So, or the self-confidence. So.
Thank you for sharing that. The kind of dissociating, freezing, I call it sometimes turtling is what I would do. Very familiar with that. I mean, I spent the better part of 10 years in that I'm not disclosing this to you space. And I would have that reaction either when there was an actual reason to, or sometimes just in anticipation of, am I going to walk into something right now?
What ifs?
Yeah, what ifs? Amazed but not surprised at how quickly you went from that to, hell no, this is not going to happen again.
I just felt so uncomfortable. Like there was so much discomfort and actually anger. I was also still, as a young, just newly out queer person, like I was still kind of rebellious.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, who does this lady think that she is?
Yeah.
Like, no, nobody gets to talk to me like that. And I really think that part of that was because I had spent the better part of my childhood with a mother who was, we won't even go into that, but there was a no, I don't consent to this, So yeah, I think it was that, and tricky to navigate that person calling back and saying, okay, yeah, let's work together.
Yeah.
And even going back into that office and having all the jewelry and having my tattoos showing and whatever, I'm sure she said something about it. I can't tell you what it was because I was done.
Yeah.
Right. It was like, I'm here to do this work. You're going to pay me really well now because you got the whatever insert expletive fee on top of all of it. And, we did good work. They still have that logo.
That's amazing. I think that this is my take, and then tell me if this feels right to you. You alluded to this, that in the initial interaction, you were uncomfortable and she was, I think, picking up on that and kind of pouncing on it.
Yeah, it was mandatory.
Yeah. And then when you went back in confidently, the dynamic completely changed because I'm sure she could sense that and you didn't care what she thought.
Yeah. No. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't think about or care what anyone thought after that. Mm-hmm. That does not mean that at all. It just means that I was going to at least, the only thing that I could control was my self-expression. Then that's what I was going to do. And that's what I did with, every client going forward. It doesn't mean that I was going to show up in jeans and a t-shirt to a really important meeting with, I don't know, we did some work for Mercedes-Benz out of Stuttgart. We worked with a lot of very large, well-known regional, national, and international nonprofits and NGOs. I was respectful in terms of how I dressed, but I never compromised, again, my own expression from, things that were on my body or that I chose, to wear from an accessory standpoint.
Yeah, and be myself in a professional way.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. The fact that she's gay too, obviously jumps out where in a way you'd be like, oh, like you thought, I'm walking into friendly territory. You happen to have a little bit of intel or a little bit of intuition, but on the face of it, when you started the story, I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. But I think it's just, as humans, there's just such a spectrum of everything. And to simplify it, which I was doing in my brain a little bit too, oh, she's gay, so it's probably going to be a really cool story. And then, is silly. And it just shows that, there's no playbook for being human. There's no playbook for being gay. It's not like, oh, well, you've got a gay person and a gay person, so this is the script you pull out, right? You're two people walking into a room and reading dynamics and being who you are, or holding back and feeding off of each other's energy. And that's all it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in her particular case, wealth and power were to her more important than connection and relationship and humanity. And again, that's on her.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So
interesting.
To me, intersectionality can't be the thing that we hang our hats on in terms of like, is this a safe space? I never, this from the group, I don't use the term safe space. I never say I create a safe space. I say I create a supportive growth environment, or a container, right? But you are the only one who gets to decide what's safe. Right. I can't tell you that you are going to necessarily feel safe here. You tell me if you do.
Right.
I think that's a really important distinction. I walked into that room thinking that I would be safe. And that was actually really psychologically dangerous place for me to be.
Yeah.
So, and again, that says more about her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings me to, we've talked about it a bit, but looking back on it now with some distance.
A lot of distance.
Thank goodness. What lens do you choose to look at it through, right? It could be resentment or gratitude, or you get to choose. So how do you view it now?
I think my answer is that I don't view it. I make the conscious choice to put that person, that experience. I mean, I'm telling it to you, right? Because you're asking for a story. Right. But do I reflect on that and have some kind of different viewpoint or perspective? I have compassion for her, if any.
Wow.
I have compassion for her because there's something inside of her that feels so insecure, and so many people like her, we know, that feels so insecure that she had to make me feel small. And, you read my book. There are so many people in my life who did that. So this was actually someone who, in my belief system, I attracted, I magnetized into my energetic field to teach me a lesson. So I have a lot of compassion for who she is and the conditions that presented themselves in her life that have essentially forced her to show up the way that she's showing up.
Yeah.
I can't change that. It's not my job. Yeah. I also don't have to engage with her. Right. So yes, she was a client for all of those years. When she came back as a client, because there was a little gap after we did that work, she came back for like a website project or something. Guess who handed that off to a project manager and an account manager?
Right.
I was like, no, I'm good.
Yep. Here you go. Good luck.
Yeah. And that was my way of being like, what's the power dynamic now? I'm just not going to engage. Like, I own a company. Back then, when I first started, it was just me and a couple of freelancers. But by the time she came back for the website project, it was like, no, I've got a whole team. There's like 18 people here. You are now handed off in the process. And whether she liked that or not didn't really matter to me. There were a million different agencies she could have hired.
Mm-hmm. Love that.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to move into the segment of the podcast that I call It's My Podcast. So there will be music. And besides that, I love music, and I'm getting to hear some really cool songs to add to my own playlist. Music, heals, unites. It's a universal language, much like stories. Want to know if there was a song you could put in the time capsule for all time for future generations to hear? What would it be and why?
I think the answer to this would be different if you asked me this for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I would have a different answer every year. My answer right now is actually a cover of Higher Love by James Vincent Morrow. So Higher Love has been covered by so many different people. There's a great remix, a faster version with Kygo and Whitney Houston. Yeah, that's probably the one that's a little bit more well known. But James Vincent Morrow, who I think has a beautiful voice, does this version that is so haunting and so beautiful and kind of etheric in a way that you just feel it in a different way than any other version of the song. And because of the relationship that I'm in, and obviously newly engaged, I feel very much like the higher love that I always thought was possible for me and the partner that I always knew that I could be has presented itself. So I want other people to feel that way, to feel that in those words, and or make whatever meaning out of it that they want. But just that whatever, maybe for me, it's like for other people, whatever relationship you're in, maybe realizing that there are parts of it that can transcend what we have all been taught as healthy relationship. Like there can be really mysterious, beautiful, really deep parts of relationship that are, beyond what we understand as consciousness. So yeah, that would be my pick.
That's beautiful. I did listen to it.
Isn't it?
It's amazing. His voice you described it perfectly. And it made me listen to it as if I had never listened to it before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's as if you had never heard those lyrics before.
Yeah. Cause it's completely different in the approach and kind of chill inducing the way he does it. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, we will add that to the Spotify playlist happily.
Very cool. Thank you.
So you talked up front about some of the amazing things that you're up to, including a book, a Healing Leaders Circle, and the retreat. So tell us a little bit more about each in whatever way you'd like to share.
Oh, wow. So the retreat is probably the easiest one because it's not until 2025. There are going to be a series of those. They are meant to stand alone, each of those retreats. The retreats are basically trauma's impact on leadership. But we're going to focus each one on like a slightly different aspect of it. So it'll be really interesting. I'm also co-facilitating the second and third one with some friends who are also kind of in the space. One is going to be more on inner child healing, and another one is going to be healing relationship with money. So really fascinating stuff there. And the Healing Leaders Circle, I'm doing them, they're 4 months each. And it's basically anyone who is in the space of DEI, trauma-informed anything, energy work, climate justice, gender-affirming care, like anything that could be construed as or categorized as healing work in the world. People who are doing that work who consider themselves queer, allies, or accomplices, want to heal in community, want to, I don't know, maybe figure out like what is really on their hearts for the next chapter of their work in the world.
Yeah.
And understand that they themselves might have some resistance to visibility. And they're also going to be on the receiving end of resistance because of that visibility. Right? So they might be targeted. They might be threatened. They might be intimidated. I know that's a lot to it's a mouthful as to like, what is this about? But it feels really important to me. And I think that the people where anything that I just said, if it resonated and you're kind of drawn to that, I'm going to do these twice per year. So 4 months at a time, just take the summers off. The groups will be no more than 20 people. So it'll be pretty intimate.
Yeah. If I may, I can attest personally to the power of the program. I did your inaugural beta version of the circle. And in terms of bringing everything together, lived experience personally, professionally for me, and then figuring out how to bring that all together in meaningful ways to take into the next chapter of what I'm doing. Everything came together during the time I was with you. So I can attest personally to the power of what you're talking about. I identified my coaching niche. I had the idea for this podcast, and it was all during the time that I was in your circle, and there's no coincidence to that. So very powerful and very grateful to have been a part of it.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you were there, because it really, every single person that participated in that first cohort helped to shape it. That was really a gift to me, because now I can go and, bring that to other people year after year.
Yeah. So the book you talked about a bit, anything additional you'd like to share about the book?
Just the supplement to the book, I think, is the only thing that we haven't talked about, which I've been getting some good feedback on. Everyone asks, like, okay, so sure, I'm going to say, yes, I've had some trauma. What do I do about it? Like, where do I start is really the question. And I get that over and over again. And so knowing that I was going to get that over and over again, there's a whole chapter sort of dedicated to, what is this going to look like for you? What are you called to? And initially I had written this whole thing, this healing menu of options, into the book. I overwrote the book by 12,000 words. So the developmental editor said, why don't you take this and make it its own thing? So the supplement to the book is myhealingmenu.com. And it's essentially just categorized as like a restaurant menu would be. Mm-hmm. So you've got your appetizers, things that are really easy, a book, a podcast, binaural beats, something that you're listening to. The shared plates are things that you do with a practitioner, right? Mm. The entrees are things that you're doing that are somatic and are going to help move trauma out of the body. And then the desserts are essentially the things that are, I say, the richest of experiences, and also things that you're not going to have that often. So psychedelics, plant medicine, things along those lines, if that is not contraindicated for you based on medications that you're taking or other mental health conditions that you might have. That sounded like a legal disclaimer. It wasn't. But yeah, just so that I like to set expectations. So yeah, there's nothing for sale on that website. It's literally just a resource. It's just, browse it. Things will be added to it over time. If you have had experiences with some of the modalities and some of the things that are on that site, I always encourage people to leave some comments. That's the whole idea of that site, is that other people can learn from one another.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a resource just for the purity of being a resource from your heart, which is beautiful. And, I've been doing some introspection and really focused on development, and read your book, and it's amazing the way you've normalized trauma and talked about the importance of healing. And then to go through that journey with you and think about where I am and know that there's this menu of additional options waiting for me when I'm ready is very comforting. So thank you.
Good. That's good feedback. I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. I can't thank you enough for being here. It just so warms my heart in a million ways. So thank you.
It was such a pleasure. I love talking to you. So this was great.
Appreciate it. All right, everyone. That brings this episode of Stories We Haven't Shared to a close. I believe stories are our humanity waiting to be shared, and it's listening that makes it possible. Thanks so much for being here by our virtual campfire. Thanks again to Kelly. Until next time, have a great day. Bye.